Nope. A little bit of spark. Friends, welcome back. I am Jason, and a Bic lighter is my go-to fire starter. But in conditions like this, it's inevitable that a drop of water off of your hood or out of these trees is going to affect the usability, the effectiveness of my Bic lighter. If I keep it nice and dry in my pocket, it'll probably be okay. But how long until this drop of water extinguishes it? Well, trying to make it stop working. Eventually it'll stop working if it gets wet enough. What happens is that little tiny ferro rod that gets in there, when that gets wet, it takes a bit to dry it back out. While you can get it to work again, it's not the end of the world as long as you got some sort of shelter to keep it from continuously getting more and more wet. You can typically blow on it, you can wipe it off, you can find a dry layer that's tucked underneath all your rain gear, and you could usually get this thing to work again in a fairly short amount of time. It takes a few minutes sometimes. But let's say I've got cold, numb, fumbly hands, and this lighter is not performing for me. It's the easiest way to get a fire going, but sometimes it might fail if it is wet. So I always recommend having some sort of backup. Now the Exotac fire sleeves that protect these things and keep them waterproof are excellent. But if you take that cap off and you're using it and it still gets wet because it's actively raining, you're still gonna have that same problem. And by the way, this is a piece of inner tube, basically, that I've wrapped around my lighter. And when the lighter is working, unlike right now, I use pieces of that as a flame extender so I don't use up the fuel that's in my lighter. I can cut a strip off of there, and a small strip will burn for several minutes, and it'll help dry out any wet kindling that you might have. With my Bic lighter, and that saves the fuel on my Bic lighter. But let's say that I am in this miserable situation right now and I need a flame. I keep a couple of ferro rods on me. One of them is around my neck always, right there. I shouldn't say always, but most of the time it's a Wazoo Spark. And then in my cash belt, my Wazoo cash belt right up front here, underneath all my layers, I've got another small little ferro rod right there with a little ceramic blade. And I've also got a little fire plug. This little Cheeto here has been stuck in my belt for probably 2 years now, give or take. And I haven't used it, obviously, and it is smashed and squished, but it doesn't matter. It's still going to work. It's a very effective thing. I've swam with this thing. It's literally raining on it right now, but it won't matter. Right, I'm getting it wet. It won't matter because the inside's gonna stay dry. In combination with my ferro rod that will strike and make sparks even when it's wet. With this, I can make sure that I have some sort of fire. So I'll find some way to protect myself from these. Maybe I'm just hovering over top of my little tiny fire until I get the thing built. Maybe I find this small little dry patch. Look at this, right here, look. You see this dry patch of bark right there on this tree? A tiny dry spot right there. The only dry spot on this whole tree is right here. And this little tiny dry spot on the ground is right here. And if I'm extra careful, I can perhaps use this as my place, as my location to get my fire started because it's dry. And then I can get myself even drier by building some sort of shelter or just building a huge, gigantic fire. And then we'll start drying me out, even if it's actively raining. If I can build a big enough, hot enough coal base, I can keep a fire going even if it's pouring down rain like it is right now. I'm wearing a really long wool outer layer right now, and it's really long because it protects your upper thighs, the part that gets wet when you're walking through brush and stuff, walking through the woods. And then that rain is just gonna be hitting your knees and thighs, right? I'm getting a little bit wet because I'm kneeling down on the ground and doing this for your entertainment, but I'm also sitting on a layer of wool, helping keeping my butt a little bit dry. And even if I do get wet with this wool layer on, it's still gonna insulate. So anyway, I come in here to my semi-dry spot that I have found, and all I gotta do is bust this thing open here. I bust open my little fire plug, twist it, break it. Thing's been in my wallet or my belt for a long time. So I fuzzed up just a little bit of that right there. I'll set it down on the ground in this semi-dry spot. I'll take my little ferro rod. I keep them connected together with this little key ring, but it helps if you take them apart for this reason. Actually, what's really helpful is to do this. Leave the key ring on here. So I keep that little key ring on the ferro rod, and even though the ferro rod is wet, you can probably see that. I think you can see that. I can strike that entire ferro rod and give me sparks using my little ceramic striker. There we go. All right, so I'm gonna fuzz this thing up a little bit more to give myself the best chance of igniting it in the rain. Let's set it right there. Let's see if we can get this thing going. So the more you fluff it, the easier it is to ignite it, but the less burn time that you got. If you keep it kind of less fluffed, you'll get a longer burn time, and that is helpful when you're trying to dry out wet kindling. There it goes. Just needed to fuzz it up a bit more. There we go. So we got her going now. That took me a few minutes. I just wasn't fuzzing it up enough. I was being a little too stingy, I think. I just needed to fuzz it up quite a bit to be able to get it going in these conditions. But now that it's burning, I could slowly start adding my kindling to this thing, have myself a little bit of a fire lay protected by this tree, and then obviously, I don't want to burn this tree, but obviously I would start moving it out, away from the tree and away from the protection of the tree as it started to grow. Wet. Everything's wet. Moisture in the air, humidity, water literally on it, on the ferro rod and on the striker. A little bit more of a struggle than it needed to be, but I think I was just being stingy. All that snap, crackle, and pop is water. So my wet lighter has been in my pocket while I was working on that. Let's see if the wet lighter is back in action just by being warmed up by my pocket. Try to keep the drops of water off my hood. Nope. A little bit of spark. There it goes. Starting to spark again. Yep, there we go. Flame. There we go. And if you leave it lit for just a little bit, it'll dry itself out. So just by the wet lighter, just by putting it back in my pocket for a little bit, I was able to get it going again. So it's important to have backups to your backups when you're talking about fire, about something as important as fire. If you are in a wild place, this little fire plug is still burning. Once I got it going, because of the wetness and the drops of water hitting it and everything, it was a little bit tricky to get her going, but once it's going, it burns for quite a while. It's still going. That's probably been, I don't know, at least 3 minutes, I'd say. And now it's trying to go out, but there's a little bit left if we can get that to catch fire, catch flame. There we go. So I'll try to keep drops of water from hitting it. But here's a whole big chunk. So that's been like 3 minutes, and the main portion of it didn't even ignite yet. See that? So these burn for a long time when you get them going. If I could just keep the drops of water from extinguishing it. And by now, I would have a whole bunch of kindling on top of it, drying it all out. And I might need to use one, might need to use 2, 3 of these things. Add some duct tape to it. Add whatever flammable whateverness I have. Cut off a piece of my boot, rubber boot, on there to keep more heat, more flame going in order to dry out my kindling. So let's say my fire is struggling right now, and my tinder is just about to go out, and I don't have my kindling ignited yet. Perhaps all I need to do is sacrifice a bit of my rubber boot right here. Cut off some of my rubber boot. I dropped that part. Let's do this piece right here. So I'll skewer off a bit of my rubber boot. You see that? Dry it off as best as I can. That to ignite as well. Obviously, I could put a bigger chunk of my rubber boot on there, but you can see for demonstration purposes, I don't want to cut my boots up, but you can see for demonstration purposes how well rubber ignites. So you can see that little piece of rubber that's on top of my tinder right there, that little piece of black rubber is ignited now, and it's burning quite strong. Obviously, if I had a bigger chunk of my boot right here, I could throw that on there and I could keep it going long enough to get my my kindling lit up and sustainable enough where it'll keep going even if it's raining outside. Look how bright and strong that rubber's burning right now. Little fire plug is still going, and that's been at least 5 minutes. I'd say longer. I would say we're going on 10 minutes now of this thing burning. And it's still keeping everything going. It's still going to be drying out our kindling. It's going to be an effective means of survival, and I've poked it and messed with it long enough to make it go out. But you can see how effective that would be.